The term invoicing has come to be known to mean not only sales for which the customer did not pay at the time, but really for any sale. That's okay because invoices give us a lot of flexibility and options as we enter the details of the transaction. To create an invoice, we can click or tap the invoice option from the home screen, or we can convert an estimate. We can also create invoices from the customer's menu. Let's go ahead and just tap the icon on the home screen and wait for the invoice screen to appear. When it does, we'll go ahead and maximize it. When we launch forms this way, it always opens to a new form. If we're looking for an already existing invoice, we can use the previous or next buttons on the top left of the screen. If we were viewing a previous invoice, we don't necessarily have to scroll all the way to the end. We can also use the new button right here on the toolbar to generate a new invoice. The first thing we need to do is designate a customer or job in order to create an invoice. We'll do this by displaying the customer job dropdown on the top left of the screen and choosing a customer. It's nice to know that QuickBooks is watching out for us and trying to let us do things the best way. When we select a customer, if that customer has any open estimates, then the available estimates window will display. We can then select an estimate, say OK, and QuickBooks will ask us if we want to create an invoice for the entire estimate or create an invoice for a percentage of the entire estimate. We actually have a third option, which allows us to create an invoice for only selected items or for different percentages of each item. This simply gives us options to say we've made an estimate. We need to honor that estimate with our client, but at the moment, we do not want to fulfill 100% of the estimate. For our purposes, we're going to go ahead and fulfill 100%, so we'll leave the default and we'll click OK. QuickBooks then populates all of the different fields that we have to choose from. That means that if the customer really is going to make a 100% purchase of the estimate and we're not going to make any modifications to quantities or price, then we basically are done. But that wouldn't be very fun, would it? So let's look at a couple of things that we can do. First of all of our forms are based on templates. And if we want to apply a different template, we can do that from the top of the invoice screen. There may be any number of different templates available, and we can choose the one that is most appropriate. We talk about customizing templates in a different chapter. Currently, we're looking at the Rock Castle invoice. Let's go ahead and take a look at the custom Rock Castle invoice. The changes that we see may be subtle. It could be colors, it could be fonts, but it could also include the layout and arrangement of columns and fields. It's important to make sure that we use the right template, whichever one that may be. But as you can see, it is also very simple to switch back and forth if we're not sure which invoice template is appropriate. So we've created an invoice really by converting an estimate into an invoice, and that gives us the flexibility of modifying anything about the estimate while also not having to type anything if nothing has changed. We want to select the appropriate template, and we also want to look carefully at all of the pieces of information and make sure that everything is still correct. If we look carefully, we'll notice that on the right-hand side, there are no payment terms defined for this particular client. We can use the drop-down and apply an appropriate payment term at this time. Another part of sales documents that is often overlooked is really the necessity to add a customer message. No, the customer message has nothing to do with accounting or the quality of the numbers that we're putting in, but it has a lot to do with customer service and making our customers feel like there's a personal message attached to their paperwork. Any variety of customer messages can be used. There are some that come with QuickBooks, and of course, we can also create our own, which I highly recommend. Here, we'll just go ahead and attach a fairly generic but appropriate thank you for your business. The customer message will print on the invoice. A memo will not. So the memo field can be used to add any kind of notation that you, your colleagues, or your business may need about this particular invoice. If we have a question about this particular customer while we're creating the invoice, it's really nice that on the right-hand side of the screen, we have a panel that provides a lot of very useful information. From the Customer tab, we can see some summary information, as well as what their open balance is, and if they have any active estimates. Near the bottom of the panel, we can also see any recent transactions. There's even a spot where we can see any notes that have been kept about the customer. If we find that there are inaccuracies as we're filling this out, we actually can edit customer information right from here without having to go into a different window. I like to tell people about this because we just don't seem to see this little pencil icon on the right hand side. That's how we can edit customer information without having to move out of the form itself. In addition to the Customer tab, there's also a Transactions tab. This is about the current transaction, so it's giving us a summary, including the amount, and if there are any other related transactions. Once again, notes still display at the bottom of this panel as well. Now, if for whatever reason we don't like this panel and it's just taking up space, we can collapse it by using the right pointing arrow that's at the top of the panel. One more little known, or maybe we should call it commonly overlooked feature, is that the item area is actually a lot like maybe a table or an Excel spreadsheet, in that we can actually insert and remove or delete different rows. So if we find that we don't need something, we can simply right click and choose to make a copy of that line, to insert a line, or to delete a line. That can make working with invoices, especially if they're being converted from estimates, much simpler than trying to take things out and then cut and paste everything to take up the space above it. As we complete the main part of the invoice, we might want to review a couple of the settings that are up on the toolbar at the top. We've already talked about find and scrolling back and forth as well as creating new. We can save this invoice without necessarily closing it. And if we accidentally created one and we don't want any record of it all, we can delete it as well. If we have an existing invoice and maybe the customer wants to make the same purchase, we can create a copy of an invoice again so we don't have to create it from scratch. If a customer made a purchase, but for some reason we need to put it on hold, we can also mark the invoice as pending. If we're going to process the invoice, though, then we could choose to print or to email. Depending on how you do your business and depending on what your customer's preferences are, either one of these is an acceptable way to submit an invoice. If we don't want to print or email right now, and we actually want to maybe print all of them out at one time, then we can use the checkboxes for print later or email later. As a matter of fact, we may not have to check these boxes at all because they may already be checked based on a customer's preferred send method. That, of course, is part of the customer record. So once we get all of this done, we could either click Save on the top, or we could come down to the bottom right and click Save and Close. If we ever make changes to the customer information, QuickBooks will prompt us to save that as the new default. In this case, we'll say yes, it's okay to save that as the new term for this customer. All right, with that, things are looking good. We were able to create an estimate for a customer first, and then quickly and easily convert that estimate into an invoice. And that's making progress through the sales cycle. In all of our jubilation over having made a sale and correctly entered it into QuickBooks, we just might be tempted to overlook all the heavy lifting that QuickBooks is doing on the back end during this process. Depending on whether goods or services were purchased and depending on when payment is received, values are going to be moved between different accounts. They may include accounts receivable, services and or product revenue, our cost of goods sold account, inventory, and depending on whether they were charged or not, possibly even sales tax payable, sales discounts, and shipping income. If the creative side of your brain hurts right now, having to think about all of these different accounts, put the part of your brain at ease. You don't have to know or remember any of it. All you need to do is select a customer, fill in items purchased, click Save and Close, and let QuickBooks worry about the accounting. That way you can focus on making more sales.